This is what happened when I simulated 10 seasons of F123 with MANOR back in the sport. Starting off in season 1, and Mercedes were back on top with Lewis Hamilton as the Ferraris were second and third. Already Verstappen and Red Bull aren't the fastest car, so this shows how crazy this sim is going to get. Ferrari also beat Mercedes by 1 point. Down the grid it was pretty standard, but AlphaTauri were the best of the backmarkers as they finished 7th. And MANOR were dead last as they didn't score a point or even get close to one, but they'll probably be up the grid in a few more seasons. At the moment, it's a game of catch up as you can see from the R&D chart. But onto the transfers, and these weren't as crazy as the results as it started with a mid-season switch for MANOR as Nissany was replaced by Boschung. At post-season, Alonso retired and so Logan Sargent went to Aston Martin and Pourchaire went to Williams. There's also chassis and durability regulation changes, so expect a bit of change in season 2. Well, Mercedes stayed on top, but Norris shared a pretty close title fight with Lewis Hamilton as 25 points separated them. Russell was a pretty good wingman for Lewis as Piastri has been uncharacteristically average so far in this save. Ferrari didn't manage a win but still nearly beat Red Bull, losing out by only 18 points. But one team that did get a win was Alpine, who won a crazy Monaco Grand Prix thanks to Gasly. And elsewhere, MANOR were last as Haas and AlphaTauri fought very hard for that elusive 7th place. On to driver moves, and with Hamilton retiring, the grid went into a frenzy. Norris moved to Mercedes with Tsunoda replacing Lando at McLaren. Magnussen went to AlphaTauri in place of Yuki as Albon was tired of carrying the Williams team and moved to the kind of high-flying Haas team. Stroll was binned off back to Williams in turn, and Drogovic was promoted at Aston Martin. And finally, Bottas retired as Hülkenberg moved to Alfa Romeo and Nissany went to Haas. Into season 3, Haas are the 6th best car and are close to breaking into the top 5 as the grid is pretty close, bar Alfa Romeo and obviously MANOR. So let's get into season 3. Well, Norris continued his winning streak at the top as he won his 2nd title with Russell not too far behind, but also not close enough to trouble him. Apart from Mercedes with 600 points, only 3 teams had over 200 as Ferrari were nearly beaten by Haas. Yes, that's right, Haas came 5th in the Constructors with Albon completely carrying the team. Nissany managed 4 points in one of the best cars, and similar to Aston Martin in real life, they built an amazing car but couldn't develop it. If they had 2 drivers, who knows where they would have finished. Albon also got his first win at Australia as Tsunoda did well to finish 4th in the Driver Championship and get his first win on home soil in Japan. Piastri once again was pretty average as the newcomer nearly doubled his points. Onto the moves, and once again the driver market was hot. Silly season began with Jack Doohan replacing Boschung at MANOR. Magnussen was dropped by AlphaTauri as Sato joined the sister team, and Gasly was surprisingly dropped at Alpine for Liam Lawson. Clearly his 2 podiums weren't enough. Elsewhere, Sainz and Stroll swapped seats for some reason and Hauger went to Haas. This was because Perez was dropped and the GOAT Nissany was moving to Red Bull. Those 4 points in the Haas seemed to really impress them. And the final move, Norris was dropped by Mercedes for Ralph Boschung. My only explanation could be his wages were too high for Mercedes' liking. Other than that, there's no other reason to drop a 2-time champ. MANOR are closing up to the back of the grid though, and it's still really close to the top, but Red Bull look to be the best once again. With no reg changes, let's move on to season 4. Well, it was going to happen eventually, but Max Verstappen finally has his first title of the save. Because he had Nissany as his teammate, he still couldn't carry Red Bull to the title as McLaren had other ideas, with Piastri becoming good all of a sudden. It's a similar story at Mercedes as Russell was 2nd but had an awful teammate, and so they couldn't get close to Red Bull or McLaren. As we go down the grid though, we get a surprising sight, MANOR not dead last. That's right, thanks to the 4 points scored by Doohan at Suzuka, MANOR have finally had their 3rd ever points finish. Of course, the first one being Bianchi at Monaco and the second being Wehrlein at Austria. These 4 points also allowed them to climb to 8, so there's quite a lot of money going their way as they look to be on the up. The points weren't as equally spread out in the season, but I guess it was still a pretty good one. Onto driver moves, and at mid-season Hülkenberg was dropped at Alpha as Hauger moved there. Pourchaire went to Haas and Vips replaced him at Williams. At post-season, Lawson returned to AlphaTauri as de Ruvela got the Alpine seat. Stroll was dropped unsurprisingly by Ferrari as Sato somehow got in the seat, and Pourchaire was dropped by Haas for Marcus Armstrong. And finally, to complete the grid, Piastri was dropped by McLaren for Vips as Vesti replaced him at Williams. We finally have a reg change, but it is a very small one as durability is the only thing affected. I'm not expecting any change, but the good thing is that MANOR are on the up and have climbed to being the 6th best car. Verstappen was champion again, and once again Russell was 2nd. Those two always carry their teams with their 2 terrible teammates, and McLaren were once again the benefactors from this as they won the Constructors again. Tsunoda and Vips were a good pair, and just below Ferrari is MANOR. They got 211 points and are very nearly up there with the top of the grid. Doohan also got his and the team's first win at Canada. But as you can see, there are 2 drivers in white. They don't race for Haas, don't worry, but I use these drivers in white to represent the free agents who have managed to join teams in mid-season. This is the point when we move to the driver transfers, and first we have Gasly replacing Doohan at MANOR. I know we got the team's first win, but they had the money now from their 8th place and they splashed the cash. Gasly as a free agent was perfect. At Ferrari, they realised the horrible mistake they made with Sato and dropped him for Norris. Lawson was also dropped to AlphaTauri for Iwasa, and Sainz was dropped to Williams for the man who he swapped seats with. Finally, for mid-season, Daruvala was dropped to Alpine for Perez. And at post-season, Norris was dropped by Ferrari and Daruvala moved there. Ricciardo was also dropped for Porchera at AlphaTauri, and Drogovic was replaced by Sato at Aston Martin. Perez also finally called it quits, and Lawson jumped back into the Alpine seat he lost 6 months ago, and Vips was dropped for Novalak and McLaren. After last season's teaser, we got massive reg changes as aero, powertrain and chassis were affected. With MANOR climbing to the top amidst the rest of the team preparing for next season, anyone could be at the top come the first race of next year. Well. Normally I show the graphic of the season here, but I'm not going to do that, because this season is so much more than the graphic I will eventually show. It starts off in Bahrain, and oh my god, look at the R&D chart. The smaller teams nailed the reg changes and the big teams completely bottled it. This meant Williams' Vesti won the first race of the season from Haas's Armstrong and Alfa's Hauger. Stroll nearly got a podium, and there isn't a top 5 team until 10th place. Next up to take victory was Iwasa at Jeddah, as he won from Albon and Vesti, with the big teams unable to catch up at this point in time. The Red Bulls and Mercedes are nowhere near this screenshot, as you can see. Next was Alpine, who would completely dominate in Baku, grabbing all 69 points available for a sprint weekend, with Lawson getting his first win. Next to win was Sargent, who would win at Imola from Hauger and Ocon, and with Aston being a decent team to start off with, you'd back them to go on and win this championship. Should the rest of the teams not catch up, of course. Logan would go on to win the next 2 rounds before his teammate Sato got the glory in Canada. He won by 60 milliseconds to Logan. Another different team to win was Hauger, who won at Austria, which meant 5 different teams won the first 9 races. As we entered the second half of the season though, the big boys were starting to catch up. Doohan won in the Ferrari in race 10 and Gasly won in round 11 at Belgium. After Sargent's dream start, only one man could challenge him. Pierre Gasly and MANOR had recovered from the initial drop and were now the fastest car. Gasly won 4 out of 5 races after round 10 to cut it close for Brazil. After the sprint race, Gasly was 18 points off the top. Surely it wasn't possible, and Sargent and Aston Martin would win this crazy season. Well, Gasly was the victor by a mere 2 points. This was by far the best season ever in one of these videos. The crazy reg changes caused a massive upset in the grid and meant teams like Mercedes and Red Bull finished last and second last. It also gave wins for terrible drivers like Sato and average ones like Hauger and Vesti, who were in terrible teams. Although MANOR have finally won a championship, I feel it was bittersweet because Sargent kinda deserved it. But the MANOR was too OP, and if sprint races didn't exist, we'd have another American title winner. But it wasn't meant to be, and looking at the R&D chart in full, Red Bull and Mercedes are still recovering, but the small teams just couldn't keep their development up after an amazing start to the season. And we haven't even talked driver moves yet. First at mid-season, Daruvala was dropped for Doohan, who we obviously have already seen. Novalak was also dropped for Drogovic at McLaren. And at post-season, Leclerc was dropped by Ferrari as they went back in for Sainz. Nastani was also dropped for some reason as Vips finally got the big seat at Red Bull. Boschon got dropped as well as Doohan went to the Silver Arrows, and Verschoor replaced Yuki at McLaren. Finally, Gasly was dropped by MANOR after getting them a driver's title for Piastri, and Daruvala somehow got back into the Ferrari. Don't ask me how. After that crazy season that had 10 different winners, let's get into season 7. We have back-to-back MANOR titles as Piastri had the most dominant season we've ever seen. 400 plus points has not been done since I switched to 16 race seasons, and only Sainz and Doohan could deny him a clean sweep. It was also nice for MANOR's title hopes that Wehrlein finally learned to drive and picked up 5 podiums along the way. Sargent has also managed to stay up there in his Aston Martin, as for once he was the one carrying the team as he kept them above Red Bull in 4th. Red Bull are still recovering and Ferrari have dropped a few places as Mercedes are definitely back. And of course Russell was second. On to driver switches, and at mid-season Daruvala was replaced by Boschon at Ferrari, Verschoor was replaced by Doohan at McLaren, and Caleb Williams joined Mercedes. At post-season Daruvala was dropped again, this time for Verschoor at Ferrari, Russell was let go by Mercedes for Max Verstappen, Nissany returned to Red Bull, and Sato was deservedly kicked out of Aston Martin, and finally to complete the grid, Ocon retired, leading to Gasly returning to Alpine. There are no reg changes for season 8, and looking at the chart, Aston have actually overtaken MANOR, but it is very close at the front. Well, this is awkward. Season 8 is lost media. I don't know what happened to the screenshots for season 8, but they are just gone. You'll have to take my word for it, but Verstappen did win the title. I don't know who from or by what margin, but he did win it. We do have one picture from this season though, and that is Kaylen Williams winning the second race in Jeddah. From these screenshots, I can kind of show proof of how the season went for some of the teams. Well, first off, Red Bull were very average, with Vips and Nissany being a very weak lineup. Ferrari were also pretty average, as the Shaw held the team back quite a bit, and the McLarens were pretty evenly matched. We do have the driver moves though, and most controversially, after having around 150 points at mid-season, Williams was dropped by Mercedes as Deruvala got the seat. This isn't even surprising anymore, but there's more. Hauger was dropped by Alpha as Shaw moved there, and Sato joined Ferrari. See what I mean by Ferrari being average? At postseason though, it was crazy. Firstly, after not winning the title, the MANOR team with high expectations sacked Piastri as Logan Sargent had done enough to earn the seat. Leclerc replaced him at Aston Martin as Gasly was dropped by Alpine for Novalak. Stroll was also sacked by Williams for Shaw as Hughes went to Alpha. Sato lost his seat again as Cordial was given the Ferrari seat for some reason. Iwasa was dropped as well, and Fittipaldi moved to AlphaTauri, and Armstrong replaced him at Aston Martin. Calderon went to Haas, and Doohan was dropped by McLaren for Kaylen Williams. Finally, and most shockingly, Deruvala was dropped by Mercedes and a goddamn sim racer replaced him. That's right, the esports drivers have finally entered the fray. Brendan Lay was the man. Well, the man did it. He got his freedom. Logan Sargent is finally a world champion. I'd never thought I'd be saying those words. He won by 4 points, and he was pretty consistent as he picked up many podiums and obviously scored decent points anytime Max retired. Williams was very good for McLaren as he outperformed Drogovic, and Leclerc carried Aston Martin massively, getting one of his only wins of the save. Red Bull and Ferrari were still as average as ever, and Lay managed to win, but as you can see, Gasly is in white writing, which means only one thing: the driver market was active. First out of the sport was Hughes, who was dropped for Ollie Caldwell. Cordial was also dropped for Iwasa at Ferrari surprisingly, and finally Gasly replaced Lay at mid-season. At post-season, it kicked off again. Leclerc was dropped first of all, and Fittipaldi went to Aston. Caldwell replaced him at AlphaTauri, and another esports driver, Tanitsa, joined Alfa Romeo. Most shockingly though, Verstappen was dropped, probably for not beating Logan Sargent, and Ricciardo replaced him. Zhou was also dropped after staying at the team for all 9 seasons, and Doohan moved there. Boschong was dropped for Shaw at Haas, and Lay managed to find a seat at Williams for season 10. Vips was dropped by Red Bull, probably for saying the M-word again, and Cordial was selected as his replacement. Williams was also somehow dropped, and of course it was Deruvala who took his seat. Gasly was also dropped after his half season, and his replacement was the GOAT, Jarno Opmeer. 92 rated Jarno, by the way. Finally, Hughes replaced Sainz at Ferrari. What the hell has happened to the grid? To top it off, there were powertrain and chassis reg changes. As we move into the final season, we have to ask a few questions. Can MANOR keep it up? Can Sargent defend his title? Can Mercedes challenge without Max? Well, let's find out. Well, Logan could do it. He was pretty clear of Ricciardo, and MANOR also won the Constructors again. Red Bull also hit another low as Williams scored more points than them. Sargent won a lot more this year with 9 wins. But Jarno managed 4 wins, which is pretty impressive, but that doesn't tell the whole story. He was actually leading the championship at mid-season with 3 wins in a row. And then he was sacked for Boschong as well. That's gotta hurt. What a crazy save. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more craziness, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.